Parsha 101, Parshas Chayei Sarah. This week's Torah portion gets its name for the first verse of the Torah portion, V'yu Chayei Sarah, Me'as Shana, V'esrim Shanim, V'sheva Shanim, Shnei Chayei Sarah. That these were the years of the life of Sarah, that they were 100 years, 20 years, and 7 years. These are the years of Sarah. And it's just an interesting way that the Torah writes by dividing up, instead of just saying 127 years, and it divides it like this to show that Sarah's life was complete, and each year she maintained her youth. She was like without sin, even when she was 100, and her beauty maintained, etc. It's written this way in praise of Sarah. And she passes away in Mearas Hamachpeilah, which is right Hebron, and Avram comes to eulogize her and weep for her. This is happening right after that Kedah, after continuing from last week's Torah portion where Yitzchak was almost sacrificed, brought up as a sacrifice, and Sarah passes away, and now they're coming to eulogize and weep for her. This is in Hebron, and Avram stands up. He speaks to the people then who lived in the area, the Bnei Ches, the Hittites, and he says, I'm a visitor in this land. Please let me buy land to bury my dead. And kind of insinuating that if not, I'm going to have to invoke that God gave this land to me, and I might have to invoke that privilege, but I'd rather go about this to buy the land. And they answer him like, no, you're a prince of God among us. Choose whatever you want, wherever you want to bury your loved one. You can bury wherever you want. And Avram is adamant. He's like, no, I'm going to buy land. I'm going to pay for it in full. And he asks for Ephron ben Sochar because he's the one who owns the Mearas Hamachpeilah, which is where he's going to bury Sarah. And they say, we talk about Chayei Sarah, which is, Arba is 4. And they say, because there were going to be 4 couples buried in the Mearas Hamachpeilah. So Avram and Sarah, Yitzchak and Rivka, Yaakov and Leah. And they say also that Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve were also buried there. So there's 4 couples that are, till today, if you go to Mearas Hamachpeilah, they say there's 4 couples that are buried there. Even though you don't necessarily see Adam and Chava are not necessarily marked like the patriarchs and matriarchs are. Anyway, so Avram's like, no, I'm going to pay for it in full. And Ephron starts giving him the whole spiel of like, no, wherever you want, I'll give it to you. You know, this whole field, whatever you want, I'll let you have. And Avram's like, no, I want to pay for it. So he says, please, what's 400 silver shekel between us? As if to like brush it aside, but Avram understood what he's saying, that he wanted 400 silver shekel, which was highly, highly marked up price. And yet Avram he measured it in full and he paid for it in full, saying, taking full ownership. This is mine. You have no claim on it, no ownership of it. If you would have given it to me as a gift, it would be like, oh, this is what I have given you. You still have a claim to it. But he's removing all claim that anybody else has to it by saying that he owns it fully. There's 3 places actually in Israel that were bought. The Mearas Hamachpeilah, Avram bought it. Har Moriah, the Temple Mount, King David bought it. And where Joseph is buried in Shechem, that was bought. And said these 3 places were bought, so there should be no contention that the Jewish people own it. Which, of course, today there's contention on all 3 of them, but it wasn't just conquered, it was actually bought outright. And it says, okay, now the field came, and it was set up in full view of the witnesses, etc., that this now is owned by Abraham. The next major thing in this Torah portion, which actually takes up almost the rest of the Torah portion, is finding the wife for Yitzchak. So it's a few years later now. Avram is 140 years old. Yitzchak is 40 years old. It's the year 2088, Jewish year. And it says, Hashem has blessed Avram Bakol with everything. We say Bakol with everything is he has a son now, which is everything. Obviously, Avram lived his whole life to be able to give over to his son. And once he has a son, he can feel like, oh, now I truly have everything. So he calls a servant. Doesn't mention the servant by name, but we know the servant's name is Eliezer. And he says, I want you to swear by the God of heaven and the God of her earth, which is also a particular language that he uses. Because he says, until I started spreading monotheism, and talking about God was always a God of heaven, like very removed and remote. So people sort of believed in this like monotheistic ideal. Well, those weren't necessarily worshiping idols, or it was kind of just a removed thing to them. But by speaking about God and spreading the word, he's now a God of earth, as in like he's real in people's lives, and it's something that people believe that he's here and he's present, and it's a day-to-day thing. And he says, swear by God of heaven and earth that you're not going to take a daughter of the Canaanite nations that we live among them, but you got to go to my family in Haran, who he actually left, if you do the math, he actually left them 65 years ago. That's already 2 parshas ago. And so Eliezer's like, well, if she's not going to come, can I take Yitzchak and bring him there? He says, no, you cannot take Yitzchak. This is his land that he's got to inherit. This land is his land that he will inherit, and you can't take him away from here. And God's going to send an angel to guide you, and everything's going to be good. But if she doesn't want to come, then you're going to be absolved of your oath, and you can find a wife from another place. And then Avram sends Eliezer with a document. Eliezer swears, he sends him with a document that he gives full ownership of everything he owns to Yitzchak. So I'm going to say is like he is my sole inheritor. So Eliezer takes 10 camels, some help along, some guys also. He loads up the camels. It says these camels were distinctive, Avram's camels, because they were muzzled, but they couldn't just graze anywhere. He didn't want them grazing in other people's lands or stuff like that. He was very particular about it, so they actually muzzled their camels. And so Eliezer goes to Aram Naharaim, and there was a miracle that the travel was much shorter than it was supposed to be, a miraculous thing. And he goes to where Nachor's family is. Nachor is Avram's brother, who was left there. When Avram leave your father's house, etc. So Nachor originally hadn't ever moved from their birthplace, basically. And he gets there, and Eliezer gets in, he goes to a well, and he says, God, Master, God, please offer this prayer up. Please, help me with what I'm going to do. When the women are going to come out to be drawing water, the girl who I come to her and I say, please, will you give me water to drink? And she says, I'm not just going to give you water to drink, I'm also going to give your camels to drink. That's going to be the sign that I'm going to know. Right? And even before he hadn't even finished speaking, then all of a sudden a beautiful young girl comes out with a pitcher of water on her shoulders. There's a lot of commentaries that say that Rivka was actually only 3 years old at the time. He comes out with a pitcher of water on her shoulders, and he watches as the water rises up to her. So she doesn't have to bend down so low. The water comes up to her, and he goes over to her. He's noticing this. Hey, can I have a drink? And of course, you can have a drink, and let me also give to your camels, etc. And there was the sign. So he gives her, says a ring of gold. They say it's a nose ring that he gave her, which was 8 grams of gold, 0.28 ounces of gold, and 2 gold bracelets. 2 gold bracelets, 10 shekel of gold. It's about 160 grams, 5.6 ounces. I said, okay, whose daughter are you? He says, I'm the daughter of Besuel, who is the son of Nachor. So this is indeed from Avram's family. And then Eliezer says, okay, can we stay over at your house? And she says, sure, we have plenty. You could totally stay at our house. Now, the commentaries they speak about how Rivka, the Gemara described her as a rose amongst thorns, because she grew up in this not a great environment, and yet she was still so beautiful, not just, of course, spiritually beautiful and in her deeds and interactions. But there's also an idea that the thorns are there to protect the rose while it grows. But once it's ready to be picked, if it stays there too long, then the thorns can actually become something, not just a protection, but something harmful. So Rivka, even though she's so young, it's now time to get her out of this house, basically. So that's another metaphor for the rose amongst thorns. Anyway, so Eliezer then praises God, says, thank you so much for all this. Rivka goes home to tell her mom, we're going to have company, and guess what happened? She has a brother, Lavan, who you see come up much later. We're going to see him again, and he hears what's going on. He sees these presents that she comes back with, and he gets very excited, like, oh, we're going to have rich visitors, and we're getting a lot of cool stuff now. He's very greedy. So he clears out the house of all idols. He takes them out of the house, and he goes to find Eliezer and the men by the well, says, I cleared out the house, don't worry, you could come in. Let's situate you, let's feed you, etc. And he brings them to their house, and Eliezer says, no, I'm not going to eat. First, I got to say my piece first. He says, okay, what do you got to say? And so Eliezer then goes through the whole story, and the Torah actually has it in the text. And it's an interesting thing because the Torah is very specific in its language. It's very brief in its language. It doesn't pontificate, and it doesn't have extra words in it. So instead of just saying, and the servant told over all that occurred, it actually goes through. My master told me to come here and made me swear, but etc., etc., etc. And it goes through all of it. So, of course, there's a lot of questions on this. So part of it is that because the Torah teach us, but the Torah has infinite wisdom and wisdom of the infinite. So part of how we get it is through stories and allusion and exegesis and all that kind of stuff. So when it's told out to us, we can learn a lot from these stories. Like we learn about Eliezer's commitment to Abraham, and that he did this all selfless, the way he went about his mission and all that kind of stuff. There's so much to learn from the way everything came about. And of course, God's miracles. So that's one thing. Another thing is that it speaks about, like, even the conversation of the servants of our forefathers it's something so much that we can learn from. And even that is just so important to learn from. And we're talking about the level that these people were at. So Eliezer goes through the whole story, and Lavan, who jumped ahead of his father Besuel, which just shows what kind of respect he had, they're both like, well, this whole story is clearly from God. There's nothing we could say for good or not good, so of course you got to take her. Like, even if we wanted to oppose, even though it says in it says that Basul, because we see he kind of gets removed from the story, like he doesn't come up again in the story. So it seems that he was about to oppose it and he was going to do something to oppose this match. And the angel that had guided Eliezer basically takes him out of the picture. He dies from it because it's like, your job, the thorns and the rose, okay, your job is done now. And if you're going to try to make trouble here, you're out of the picture. You've done what you had to do and bring Rivka to the world. So then after they say, okay, well, obviously you got to take her, etc. So Eliezer brings out gold and silver to different stuff for Rivka, and he brings out these rare and delectable fruits to give to Lavan and his mother. And then they stay the night, and the next morning they're like, okay, we're ready to go, take Rivka with us. And then the mother and Lavan are like, no, wait a second. She's got to stay here, she's got to prepare herself, etc., etc. And Eliezer's like, no, we got to take her, we got to go. So they say, okay, well, we'll call Rivka and we'll see what she says. So this is kind of a thing also that a woman is not supposed to be engaged against her will. She has to agree to the engagement. And so they say, Rivka, you want to go with this guy? And she's like, yep, I'm totally going to go. Whether or not you let me, I'm going. So they say, okay, fine. So they bless her and they send her off. They say, from you should come multitudes and your children should overcome their foes, which interestingly enough will one day be Lavan and Lavan's progeny. So anyway, so they send her off, etc. So they leave. Eliezer takes Rivka and they go. And they set out, and as they come upon, they're coming home, to a new home now, and at this time, Yitzchak, it says he was out in the field. And what was he doing out in the field? Say he was davening. So Avram had set that you daven in the morning, which is Shachris, and Yitzchak set that you daven Mincha, which the afternoon service. And the afternoon service has something unique about it, is that, okay, you could say you pray in the morning that starts your day, you pray in the evening that wraps up your day. But praying in the afternoon is much more difficult because you got to stop your day to make sure you pray in the afternoon. So there's something unique about the afternoon service. Anyway, this was instituted by Yitzchak. So Rivka sees this man. She says, "Who is this guy?" And they're like, and Eliezer's like, "Well, this is my master's son. This is him. This is my master's son." So it says Rivka veils herself then, and then Eliezer sees Yitzchak and he recounts. They come up to him and he recounts everything that occurred, and he's very meticulous to give him all the details. And don't worry, I followed everything and look at the miracles, etc. And then Yitzchak brings Rivka to the tent of his mother, and he sees that she's just like his mother, as in that she is spiritually able to be the one to carry on the legacy of his mother, because there were certain miracles that occurred with Sarah that now are happening with Rivka. So for example, when Sarah would light her candles on Friday, they would stay lit to the following Friday. It says even a little bit of bread that she made was satiating, and that there was a cloud of glory kind of that hovered over the tent. So he sees all this occurs, and then he marries. He sees, okay, she's fitting like my mother, and he marries her. It says he loves her, and he was consoled from the loss of his mother. And then something that's also pointed out here is that we see that Rivka did all this, and she was 3 years old. So even before she got married, she was lighting Shabbat candles. So which is something that we can see that even 3-year-olds, they could and they should be lighting Shabbat candles, because it's all about bringing light into the world and holiness and etc. And this is something that they can do. Now the Torah portion wraps up with Avram. It says he marries someone named Keturah, which they say is actually Hagar, the Egyptian maidservant, but she's since repented, she's come back from her ways. So it says that Avram remarries her, and she has a bunch of sons. And then it says, though, very specifically that Avram gives each of these sons, he gives them gifts. Say it might have been spiritual gifts that he gave them, and then he sends them all eastward. He said, be good, etc. But everything that I have really goes to Yitzchak, because Yitzchak is his sole heir. And it says Avram lived to a good old age, and he passed away in peace, etc. Avram passes away at the age of 175. This is the Hebrew year 2123. And it says his sons, Yitzchak followed by Yishmael, because Yishmael had since repented and acknowledged that Yitzchak is the heir. So Yitzchak followed by Yishmael, they bury him in Mearas Hamachpeilah, and then it says God blesses Yitzchak. And then the Torah portion finishes wrapping up with going through all the descendants of Yishmael. God had said that Yishmael is going to become a great nation, so it goes through the rest of his descendants. But it says these are the children, the descendants of Yishmael, the son of the handmaid, because remember what your place is. So you became a great nation, but remember that you're a secondary status, kind of, to Yitzchak and to Yitzchak's descendants. Yishmael passed away at 137, and it says that he had lived among his people, etc. And just like a final note on Yishmael is that he said Yishmael kind of represents the fallen version of Abraham. So Avram represented a holy love for God, and for kindness to giving to others, and Yishmael, the fallen version of that, was the love of physicality and sensuality. So the Torah portion ends off with quickly going through all of Yishmael's descendants, and next week's Torah portion we continue with the story of Yitzchak and Yitzchak's descendants.